that's what you're going to be saying when you first watch this movie, The Vampire Next Door. Because you think, have they just remade Fright Night but for a fraction of the budget? Well, let's discuss. So, The Vampire Next Door, a 2024 horror comedy that initially looks like a remake of Fright Night, which of course was an adaptation of Rear Window. And there's been plenty of adaptations of that story and variations of that story, including Fright Night's own franchise, who kind of remade the original movie 2 times. So, when you first watch this film, the first act more or less mirrors Fright Night. It focuses on this young kind of guy, 20-year-old guy, and he's a bit of an introvert, a bit of a loner, into kind of various kind of geek culture and all of this. And he has this mysterious person that moves in next door. And of course, if you're familiar with Fright Night, you know that this is actually a vampire. In this instance, it's actually a female vampire. And, you know, he's kind of there sort of spying on her and kind of like sees evidence that, you know, she may well be a creature of the night, so to speak. So far, so Fright Night. But once we kind of get into that kind of that first meeting with this vampire called Victoria, it takes a slightly different path. So effectively, from that point on, it turns into a kind of teen kind of horror comedy vampire movie that we've seen a few times before, where this Victoria, this vampire, wants our male protagonist to effectively help her track down various other vampires. All in the meantime, he has this kind of crush on this girl. This Victoria seems to be having a little bit of a flirtation with him. Various other kind of people come in and out of the story as well. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. So I actually think it's a fun little bait and switch. The fact that I think the filmmakers here knowingly homaged Fright Night and kind of fooled people into thinking it's going to be a remake. I guess for a third of it, it is. But there's no like Peter Vincent character. The kind of relationship between our protagonist and our vampire is very different. So yeah, it does kind of turn into a different sort of style of film. But nonetheless, it's an interesting like idea here to partially kind of remake something and then spin it off into a different direction. I thought it was, you know, where is it on the kind of the homage to kind of rip-off scale? I'm not quite sure where it would fall on that, but yeah, it is what it is. But the story that we actually do get, you know, I think it's a fun and charming, quite light-hearted, kind of teen vampire movie. You know, not like necessarily the Twilight. It doesn't play up the kind of the romance effectively. It's more of like the kind of like the 80s sort of style, Once Bitten, kind of My Best Friend's a Vampire style kind of like vampire teen comedies that we had back in the 80s. It plays a little bit more like that, which I found interesting. I also think the relationships between the characters was a little different than I was expecting. Like, for example, Victoria, our kind of our vampire, for example, her motivations are a little unclear, which is not always not actually particularly 100% a good thing, but it gave her mystery. You weren't quite sure what she wanted, and there's not really necessarily a seduction, but there's a flirtation with our two kind of main sort of characters. But he's kind of more interested in like another girl. So there's some interesting, I think, relationships and kind of like sort of teen drama-y stuff. Like our main guy, he's attracted to this you know, this girl who he's been friends with for years. But there's another guy who he's kind of friends with that's also attracted to her, but he actually tries to help his friend like get set up with this girl he likes. So there's some kind of quite, you know, fun interpersonal kind of dynamics. So if you're a fan of kind of like teen drama with this kind of vampire mythology kind of like sewn in there, there's an element of fun there. There's lots of kind of sexy vampire women. Well, there's not lots of vampire women. There's a couple of scenes with the vampire women that we do get, who are quite kind of like provocative, shall we say, without being anything explicit, but nonetheless, you know, there was a couple of lesbian vampire scenes and things like that for a little bit of titillation there, and yes, everyone looks kind of quite attractive, etc., etc. So there's all that going on. The movie isn't really a like a scary film in any way. It's not trying to be. It's more of a kind of you know, a charming comedic drama, if that makes sense. There's a little bit of reasonable vampire makeup, but I actually think they underplay it a little bit, which I think was probably the right move, because this is kind of clearly a kind of a lower budget movie. And you know, the best you'll see is kind of a little bit of white makeup with some veins and things with it, and not overly kind of big fangs. But I actually quite liked them holding back a little bit. I think had they gone into kind of more of an overt, big chunky fangs that, you know, the actors kind of trip over and things, you know, I don't think that ever really worked. I think this more of just a subtle kind of like veneer of vampirism, I think, works in this movie's favour. So that was you know, that was all good. There's some comedic moments in there that I think kind of worked as well. The movie overall is kind of like a lightweight, fun and charming film in many ways. It's not going to kind of like blow your socks off. It's neither scary nor particularly laugh out loud funny or anything like that, but I think it's charming, and I kind of enjoyed the story to a degree, especially when you have that element of kind of like the bait and switch, and it's more or less a Fright Night kind of remake, which it kind of fools you into thinking first of all. What doesn't work in this movie's favour, I mean, a lot of what I just said as positives, I think also can be reflective of a negative here. I mean, the story itself is kind of somewhat kind of lightweight, and I don't think necessarily completely works. I mean, that the whole the MO of this Victoria, our female vampire, is she's hunting down other vampires, and we see there's a number of instances where this happens, but there's no evidence that these other victims are actually vampires, bar the final one. I'm thinking, was that BS, or was that just like a real thing? Because certainly the second to last one certainly did not seem like a vampire, and it's just like, it's a little unclear if like she was actually just kind of like just killing people and telling the guy that oh yeah they're vampires, and like yeah, he's just sort of going along with it. So it doesn't really quite, it's not really quite clear what the story's actually supposed to be happening. Also, they do play fast and loose with vampire lore. I mean, there's scenes where we have our vampires, and there is more than one, out walking in the daylight, no problem, and there's just no mention of anything like that, you know, and it being a problem or anything like that, or other elements of kind of established kind of vampire lore. It just seems to be kind of like, you know, forgotten about, to be honest. And it might, in this universe, maybe it wouldn't be, you know, it's not suitable, but people are aware of the mythology of vampires in this film. So why didn't like our main guy kind of question it or anything like that? Why is it, you know, the rules of the kind of the vampire never really seem to be particularly kind of established here. The movie's obviously trying to go for a relatively low age rating, so it's not a gory film. It's not particularly kind of bloodthirsty. We would never really see any type of gore or anything like that. The thing I think I found the most odd with this movie is some of the dialogue sequences / acting. Now, I'm not quite sure if this is down to bad editing, bad acting, or bad direction, but there's a lot of kind of like weird pauses after dialogue sequences. So you'll have two customers interacting, and then there'll be just a naturally long pause between like the response or things like that, or there'll be like a reaction that just seems to be a little bit delayed. It's almost like actors are like waiting for their mark, or I can't tell if it's that or whether it's just kind of like not particularly strong acting, or whether their direction has been said like that. But it's all throughout the film with multiple characters where they just seem to have these weird sort of like silences or pauses between kind of conversations or dialogue where they kind of look a little bit lost, thinking, you know, and it's just like, it's oddly paced because of that. And there are sequences like where they'll kind of have a joke, and then they're kind of like, it's almost like they're waiting for like the audience to start clapping or something, and it's just like, it's weird. It's just like oddly paced in some ways, and kind of like the flow of the movie just seems a little bit kind of rocky, because they have these kind of just odd little choices that are made. And I don't know if the editing could have just, you know, edited like half a second here and there off these sequences to make them just seem a little bit more like reactive and natural kind of like dialogue and stuff, or whether it's just the kind of the choice that the director has made, or the actors just were kind of like a little bit late in delivering their lines or something like that. But it's relatively consistent through the movie. So yeah, it's a little bit, it feels kind of like half-baked because of that. So the movie kind of feels a little amateurish, I have to be honest, because of mainly that. It also has a very kind of like tween, kind of friendly kind of sheen. Like I said, it plays more like an 80s comedy in regards to the story, but it has that kind of like modern made-for-TV sheen. So overall, I've got to say I still found this movie a somewhat of a charming film, and I did get wrapped up in the story and the characters. But I think the it could have been a tighter movie. I think it could have been a bit more of a an edgier movie, to be honest. I think the vampire lore was just not established whatsoever, and even kind of what our vampires are doing, they don't really seem to feed on blood or anything. It's just, you know, it's just kind of like whatever. It's just like we just want to establish the rules of vampirism that apply to this kind of movie and its world or anything like that. So it feels kind of like a half-baked idea. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Not a bad film. It's watchable, very lightweight. But if you want meat on the bones, or blood in the veins, I guess,